romance readers. I am Liz Donatelli. Welcome to Reader Seeks Romance, the #1 romance novel talk show on YouTube. Award-winning historical romance author Melissa Oliver joins me to discuss her medieval romance, A Defiant Maiden's Knight, book 1 in Protectors of the Crown series. And Melissa plays Medieval Courtship Trivia. Enjoy, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hi, Melissa. Welcome back to Reader Seeks Romance.
Hi, Liz. Lovely to be back.
Congratulations on the release of A Defiant Maiden's Knight and the launch of your Protectors of the Crown series.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this new series.
A Defiant Maiden's Knight is set in 1226 London. And as I read your novel, I conjured images from movies. So I kept thinking of like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger to kind of picture the environment. Is there a particular movie or book that you have in mind as you write your medieval romances?
I'm a big fan of, this isn't romance actually, but C.J. Sansom's books. They were set in the Tudor London, and they were the Shardlake detective books, and they were very brilliant in terms of, I mean, although that's a totally different century, it was really good in terms of getting me the flavor, and then obviously the research that I did as well in that time of London. So it was that really sort of gave me a flavor of it. In terms of films, I mean, both Robin Hood and the the Heath Ledger Knight's Tale film definitely inspired me in the past, definitely, but perhaps not this one as much really. But It just all feeds in, doesn't it? All the films and books that you read, definitely.
Yes, for sure. So Protectors of the Crown is a new series.
Yeah.
What is the overarching premise, and how many books are expected?
Okay, so there's definitely going to be just 3 books.
Okay.
You're going to meet all 3. In fact, if you've read the book, you would know that all 3 heroes are introduced in the first book, in this in the Defiant Maiden's Knight. At the back of my mind, I think my inspiration, going back to inspiration, was the 3 Musketeers. So that was really a starting point for me. But rather than being in Paris, it was in London. And this particular period in English history was quite turbulent. You had a young king who was not really coming into his own governance. He still had Lord Protector. Hubert de Burgh was a real person. And so I just sort of wove the whole story around this in terms of having this really awful, nefarious sort of group who are very shadowy. They don't really know much about them, and they're just trying to, as much as they can, I suppose, they're trying to undermine this new kind of king's reign, basically, as much as they can. Our group of 3 knights who are 3 crown knights, and they are very much a secret. They've got this sort of secret sort of allegiance to one another that they're doing for Hubert de Burgh, who's probably at this point in history the most powerful man in England, definitely, beside the king, obviously. And he had a lot of enemies, and that is historically, that is very accurate. It's the first book on the Protectors of the Crown series. So we've got this group of knights who have to protect the realm from this threat against the crown, and they don't know who it is. As our hero, Warren de Talmont, starts to investigate, and he's following a particular informant, suddenly he comes across Joan Levant. And Joan is the sister of Thomas, who was in the last book that I wrote. Although this is the beginning of a new series, there's sort of that particular link is there. He finds her on the street, and she's basically fallen over, and he goes to help. He sort of has to think, am I going to keep carrying on following this guy that I'm supposed to carry on following, or do I have to go to the aid of Joan? And of course he goes to help Joan, and that is really where the adventure starts, because basically he has to look out for her while her brother is away, but at the same time he has all this work that he has to do, and he's trying as hard as he can to get Joan to just go home and not come into the city of London because it's dangerous at the moment. And she doesn't really listen to him at all. So she carries on coming back because she has work that she does at this particular church, very sort of small church, which actually did exist. I would like to add St. All Hallows, yeah, of London. Later on, I think it actually, I don't know what happened to it. It might have actually got destroyed in, the Fire of London. I'm not, yeah, but at some point it just sort of disappears. But at this particular moment in time, it did definitely exist. So I just thought I'd like to create a little history around it as well, because it's quite small and inconsequential. And so, yeah, she works there, she helps out there, and it gives her a lot of, it just gives her a purpose, really. Because the thing about Joan that's quite special is that she is going blind. And I really wanted to sort of, for her to have this autonomy and not make her out to be quite a weak character or anything like that, or just because that she had this, her blindness wasn't going to actually stop her from doing things that she wanted to do. She's not quite blind, but she's got steadily going blind, basically. Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting that you mentioned about All Hallows, like being a real place. Was that the genesis of the story? Is that you came across All Hallows in research, and then you're like, oh, I could have Joan be involved in that church and the charity? Like, is that how it all started?
Well, yeah, I mean, I wanted it. The main thing for me was that I really, really wanted it to be rooted in London, because I hadn't, I've read loads and loads of medieval books and medieval romance. I'm really a big fan myself of other authors. Having said that, I hadn't really read anything that was based in London itself. And London's such a great city, and it's such an old city, and it's just had, so many reinventions over time. There's the Georgian London, and then there's the Tudor London. And this was going back, stripping it back to its medieval core. And at this time, it was still hustling, bustling city of trade and commerce. And you had, obviously, outside of the city walls, you had Westminster, and so so I just wanted to get a real flavor of that. And I basically bought a very old map, or it was a repro basically, but as far as I could, and that's where I sort of saw All Hallows on the map and all of that sort of stuff. That's when it really sort of started to kind of all get, fit into place, basically.
Oh, I love that. Starting with the map. Oh, that's so romantic in itself. It's like, oh, I found this map and look at this. I love it. I love that. As far as capturing the vibe and the hustle and the bustle, you really do a good job of that on the page.
My thing for that was, I've got a heroine here who is losing her sight. And so I also wanted to immerse the reader in what it must be, what's maybe like for being her, as she's going around London. So that's why I wanted to, as much as I could, in a book, sort of try and instill as many different sensations as you can in other ways, if that makes sense. So it wasn't just, so that you could get a feel. It was almost like I wanted people to feel what it, what it tastes like, or what it smelled like, so I just wanted everything to be there.
So Joan and Warren, our two romance protagonists, I could read them all day, every day. They are very well suited as a romantic couple and as a daring, clever spying duo. What did you love most about writing Joan and Warren's love story?
I just love the fact that they're both teaching one another about how to kind of let go of the past in a different way. I mean, for instance, Joan has this massive impediment with her vision, as we've said, yet she's trying to get him to sort of get Warren to sort of think about using his other senses in the work that he does, and at the same time, he's also sort of teaching her that she could be a bit more not courageous, because she is pretty courageous as it is, but just to sort of not hold back, and so they both come together, and when they're together and they're working together, and obviously they're really attracted to one another as well, that goes without saying, but when they do come together, they're really a force to be reckoned with. They really kind of come together and they find things out together. So they make a brilliant team in that way. So as a couple, I think I really love that aspect of them, the fact that they both sort of teaching one another different things, and yet they teach one another how to trust, how to let go of the past, and how to sort of care for one another. I really, really enjoyed writing both of them, actually. I thought they were I loved them. As you said, I loved those two characters so much myself. They really, they sort of came out me, and I feel like they're kind of separate now, you know, when I talk about it. It just sounds a bit crazy, but yeah, they are really an endearing couple. I liked everything about them.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As you mentioned, Joan is losing her sight, which influences the decisions that she makes throughout the novel. What went into writing a visually impaired heroine? Did you go about writing her any differently than your previous heroines? Also, did you use a sensitivity reader to go through that and make sure that there was, accurate representation?
I really wanted to get her right, because at the end of the day, you know, it was some, you know, she is going through this, but it had to be believable. So I contacted the Royal National Institute of Blind People, and so I did sort of surveys. I asked them for sort of input. They were really good, actually. So I didn't get sensitivity readers as such, but I did have a lot of input sort of from people, because although obviously it's very different now, in terms of what people, you know, the support that people with partially, you know, blind people have, and also blind people in general, or I think all disabilities, they, you know, the support that they perhaps get these days are obviously going to be vastly different to medieval times. Right. Having said that, what they're going through essentially is not going to be that different. So that's why I thought it would be quite good to sort of use actual experiences of people now, and try and sort of use that somehow to sort of get a sense of Joan as well, as best as I can.
Right. Oh, wow. That's really fascinating. How many people participated in, you said it was a survey of sorts? Like how many?
Yeah, I did a survey of sorts, just to sort of say how they would feel about certain things. So I broke it down to lots of different things, and then I went back with certain, you know, other questions. So it was a really nice dialogue, if you like, of things that I wanted to clarify with them, in terms of what somebody who had who was visually impaired would go through in certain situations, you know, and try and obviously use that and into the fabric of I suppose, into what Joan would experience, basically.
Both Joan and Warren are living with profound grief, which really helps to, build their love bond with each other. I recently read, and I find this fascinating, that grief and love are two sides of the same coin. As a writer, what was it like to explore that duality on the page?
I think loss is something that many of us have experienced. I certainly have. And so I could definitely use those sort of emotions that I've experienced myself into both Warren's loss and also Joan's. And I think, you know, you asked me earlier on about how when they come together, I think this is another area when they come together, how they help each other out. Really, they do. So, and I think, yeah, it was definitely emotionally draining, but equally, I think as they were sort of going through, so, you know, these losses, and they were sort of talking about their feelings, it really did sort of help. It was almost like, it's so cathartic, you know, it's basically that it was very cathartic. And then at the other end of it, they started to realize that you know, they are coming out of it the other end. I mean, obviously it never goes away, that loss. And I hoped I didn't sort of go, oh yeah, well, we're done with that. That's great.
Oh, no.
Let's move on. I didn't want it to come across like that, but equally, I wanted them to sort of have somebody there that they could really talk to. And although they, you know, shared this loss, they were their own personal loss. It wasn't something that it wasn't somebody that they lost together. And so they could then help one another overcome these things. I wanted it to be quite empowering at the end of it, so that they felt quite empowered to move on with their lives.
If you were to wake up in medieval England tomorrow morning, what's the first thing that you would do?
That is a really good question. I would like to, okay, so I've got a couple of scenes in this particular book where they travel over London Bridge. The London Bridge we have now is not that one, unfortunately. So I'd love to go over this London Bridge and see what it was really like. You know, they've got replicas in the London Museum, and it just isn't quite the same. I just would love to actually go, you know, cross the bridge from one side to the other and see what it was really like. It would have been quite fascinating, because it was a covered bridge. In Florence, there's Ponte Vecchio, and again, the Ponte Vecchio, it's kind of covered, and you've got shops and dwellings and all that sort of stuff. And it would have been the same with this particular London Bridge. So I would have loved to have done that, gone into the tavern that they had there. And there was a church, and it was called Thomas the Becket Chapel, because originally that bridge was built because you had loads of pilgrims coming and going to Canterbury. So that's one of the reasons why it was, well, I mean, it wasn't the only reason, but it was built so that people can sort of cross it easily.
Funny enough, whenever I ask this question of historical romance authors, what would you do if you woke up in that time? I've had a number of authors say, try to find some version of coffee.
I don't know if I would have wanted to try their food, actually. So
I know. I mean, of course,
very heavily meat based, and I don't eat much. I'm a pescatarian, so it would have been dreadful for me.
Yeah.
I do describe the food really as much as I can, with the meat and the sauces and everything, and I really do a lot of research in that. But obviously, personally, I don't actually eat myself.
If an engaged couple blank, it meant that they had given consent to marry, creating a legally binding marriage. A, exchanged love tokens. B, had sex. C, lived together. D, attended church together.
I would go for A. I think that's the token one, really. Although, you know, in medieval times, they didn't have to do any of that stuff, actually. They could live together. They could have got married they could just sort of say we're married and that was it. I think it depends whether it's nobility or you know, in the feudal system, obviously, it was quite different where you were on the pecking order. The people of royal blood or nobility, they got married, especially the girls, very, very early. I mean, we would consider them children still, and I have to find ingenious ways all the time when I'm writing not to have very young girls. Obviously.
Right. Yes, that's a good point, because I have noticed, I read about, as soon as they young girls hit puberty, that they would be, it's like, okay, you can get married now. So you're saying if an engaged couple exchanged love tokens, it meant that they had given consent to marry, creating a legally binding marriage. That is your answer. And so. That is incorrect.
Oh, no.
If an engaged couple had sex, it meant that they had given consent to marry, creating a legally binding marriage. Oh. During the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church ruled supreme. On which day were people allowed to have sex? A, Sunday. B, Thursday. C, Friday. D, Tuesday.
I'm going to go with Tuesday.
You are correct. So Sunday was the Lord's Day, so no sex on that day. And Thursdays and Fridays were supposed to be days for preparing to receive communion. So that was like your prep days leading up to church. So very good. Which fruit was a symbol of love in the late Middle Ages? A, cherries. B, bananas. C, quinces. Or D, blackberries.
Okay, so not bananas. They wouldn't have been there. For I don't know this one either. I'm going to go for cherries.
You are correct. I'm guessing because they're red and it's got like two testicle-like fruits. I don't know.
I don't know whether. Yeah, maybe.
What is a term for penis during the Middle Ages? Okay. 4 choices. One term is correct. A, fiddle. B, needle. C, longbow. Or D, godstaff.
Okay. Fiddle and fiddle. I don't know. This is a real stab in the dark. I'm gonna say fiddle.
Melissa, you are correct. It was called a fiddle. I came up with Godstaff, and I actually think maybe someone should use that as a euphemism.
Okay.
Love tokens were commonly exchanged between people during courtship in the Middle Ages, which is not a gift given to a woman. A, mirror. B, wash basin. C, spices such as nutmeg. D, rings, which was not a gift given.
I think I'm going to go with wash basin. Wrong.
Melissa, you are incorrect.
Oh,
Apparently, wash basins were given, but spices such as nutmeg were not,
okay.
even though it existed. Although, there might have been someone who
Yeah,
did.
the reason I thought that is because they were so expensive.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I thought,
Yes.
well, it just shows if you're giving somebody spices, we wouldn't think of anything of it today. But I just suddenly thought, well, maybe if somebody gave them spices back then, it was like a token of how much they valued them. But obviously, I was wrong.
Well, you know what? It might have happened, and you could certainly have that happen in your novels. But popularly, I guess, spices, You got 3 out of 5 correct. Well, it is always a delight to chat with you, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining me here on Reader Seeks Romance.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been brilliant. Love to come again.